Welcome to the fifth session of the IPS Singapore Perspectives Conference 2021. My name is Carol Soon. I am Senior Research Fellow and Head of the Society and Culture Department at IPS. Now, the title of this afternoon's panel is Technology and Livability. But before I introduce the moderator for this panel, let me run through a few administrative details. Now, throughout the session, you as conference participants can submit your questions to the panelists through the questions section on this forum site. We ask that you contribute to the discussion in a respectful and safe manner, focusing on the issues discussed. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce the moderator for this session, Dr. Cheong Koon Hian. Now, Dr. Cheong is currently chairman of the Center for Livable Cities at the Ministry of National Development. Many of you would know her as the former CEO of the Housing and Development Board, where she oversaw the development and management of more than 1 million public housing flats. She was also CEO of the Urban Redevelopment Authority, where she played a key role in many major urban transformation projects such as Marina Bay. Currently, Dr. Cheong wears many hats, including being a fellow at the Singapore Institute of Architects and Institute of Planners, and she serves on the board of NUS as well. I'm sure you will enjoy the panel as much as I will. So over to you, Dr. Cheong.
Thank you very much, Carol. Well, good afternoon and welcome to this IPS Singapore Perspective Conference. As you're aware, the conference really features 9 online interactive forums on the 12th, 14th, and 19th January, with a final hybrid conference on the 25th of January. So we will be examining the challenges presented by the disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as trends that will impact our economy, our society, and the politics and governance of Singapore, and how we can reimagine Singapore's future over the next decade. Well, you have now tuned in to Forum 5, and the focus is on technology and livability. Well, this is a very broad topic, so let me try to attempt to set out a broad framework for our discussion. Obviously, the first question is, what is livability? I would venture that there are 3 aspects of livability. First is the physical aspects. A livable city is really one that supports the health, the well-being, and the quality of life of the people who live and work in them. So the way we plan, design, build, manage cities can enhance or detract from livability. And these physical characteristics will include things like the quality of our built environment, the reliability of municipal services and transport networks, how we access work, education, health, community services, and social and recreational opportunities. But less tangible to city livability are broader societal and cultural characteristics of places and communities within cities. The cultural characteristics of cities reflect really both historical and contemporary ways of living, the values and meaning attached to places and events, and the interaction that we have with the natural environment. And of course, the social aspects of cities include how cities can help to build social capital and strengthen social cohesion that contribute to a sense of trust and inclusion. And I think a lot of our discussion may cover these. And of course, cities are in a rush to adopt technology, particularly digital technology, to improve the livability of cities. And indeed, COVID-19 has accelerated technological innovation in all areas of live, learn, work, and in the way we connect from the safety of our homes. So we can expect to continue to see rapid technological development impacting our lives, our environment, and our society. Now, this leads us to reflect on some crucial questions from a city perspective. Going forward, what are the opportunities for harnessing technology to improve the livability of cities? How do we integrate the physical world with the digital world? If everybody is doing online retail, it completely changes, for example, the malls that we have. How do we deploy technology in effective and efficient ways that truly meet the needs of cities and in particular its citizens? what should be the main areas of focus? And bearing in mind that the context of this track is about society to bring happiness based on justice and equality, we would need to ask ourselves, what will a digital society look like? Which groups will be impacted positively and negatively? At a national level, how will technology impact our sense of being a national community? And at a more local level, how do we connect and continue to build social capital? But we know that there's also a darker side to technological innovation, right? And these issues really range from physical challenges, such as the generation of mountains of e-waste, the higher cost of maintaining digital infrastructure, to societal issues regarding the widening digital divide and concerns with privacy, etc. Well, we have today a fantastic group of panelists and discussants who will help to draw out the key insights into some of these issues. And we will start with two speakers who will give a presentation of about 15 minutes each. And thereafter, I will invite comments from two of our discussants on their thoughts, questions, and any reactions to the presentations. Then after that, we will turn the session to you, online participants, and I hope that all of you who are tuning in will participate actively through Pigeonhole in a two-way conversation with us, and particularly with the panelists and the discussants. So let me, with great pleasure, introduce you to our first speaker, who is Ms. Audrey Tang. Now, she is Taiwan's digital minister in charge of social innovation. So thank you, Audrey, for taking the time to join us. And in the public sector, Audrey served on the Taiwan National Development Council's Open Data Committee. And in the private sector, she worked as a consultant with Apple on computational linguistics, with Oxford University Press on crowd lexicography, and with social text on social interaction design. So here we have someone who really knows technology. And of course, Taiwan has been one of the few countries that has successfully managed COVID-19 pandemic thus far. So we look forward to Audrey sharing on Taiwan's experience with us. Over to you, Audrey.
Hello, good local time, everyone. Really happy to virtually to share some thoughts around digital innovation for I'm digital minister.tw in charge of innovation. Now, I'm told that I just have to say next slide and the slides will magically appear. Is that a arrangement? Yes. Okay, right. So as you can see, we have this hashtag Taiwan can help, and we're happy to share the so-called Taiwan model of countering the pandemic with no lockdown and countering the pandemic with no takedown. And result, of course, it's too soon to call it the end result, but is that we were able to strengthen democracy even during the twin demics, the infodemic and pandemic, through what we call the fair and fun principles, which improves livability for everyone involved. Next slide. Okay, so the first pertains to the accountability. When we say accountability, we mean that not only the government has to give an account to the citizens in a rapid fashion, in an accountable way, but also mutual accountability in the sense that any citizen who are willing to help the nation and of us can decide to begin to give an account of what the situation looks like from the social sector's perspective. This is called people-public-private partnership with the people first. Next slide. The collective intelligence system serves as a really good example. Around more than 1 year ago now, in December, there was on PTT, Taiwan's equivalent of Reddit. The difference is that our PTT is not for profit. It is literally National Taiwan University's student side project. It's open source, self-governed, democratically governed, and not answered to any capitalist shareholder. does. This proved to be important because people are less distracted by the antisocial aspect of social media, but rather on the pro-social aspect, like the Hyde Park or something, is a digital public infrastructure. And so it is on PTT where this person called No More Pipe reposted Dr. Li Wenliang from Wuhan's message that there's, and I quote, 7 new SARS cases found, unquote. Now, while Dr. Li Wenliang didn't amplify his message to the citizens of Wuhan for obvious reasons, he did save the Taiwanese people because people starting it on the PTT. And the upshot is that the very next day, starting 1st of January, we started health inspections from from Wuhan into Taiwan. So next slide. And this is thanks to according to the Civicus Monitor, Taiwan is the most open, actually the only completely open jurisdiction in all of Asia in terms of the freedom of assembly, speech, and the press. So the citizens that the government will not quote-unquote harmonize this whistleblowing, and the government trusts the citizens to triage the veracity of this intelligence, right, collective intelligence. And so we set up the Central Epidemic Command Center to start give an account to all the questions that the citizens may have, even before we had the first reported case locally. Next slide. Now in CECC, the most important part is not digital, it's quite analog. It's a call center with this toll-free number 1922 that anyone can call after the every 2 p.m. Press conference where all the CECC people answer all the journalists' questions. If you have doubts or fears or anything, you just call 1922. 95% of the calls gets answered immediately with the scientific principle shared. But there's also a handful. For example, around mid-April, there was a young boy that called saying, hey, you're rationing out mask, but all I get is pink medical mask. All my classmates at class who are boys wear blue, and I don't want to wear pink mask to the school for I was isolated or bullied or something. Now, that's something that the call center cannot answer. So it get escalated to the CC the very next day. So at the 13th of April at 2 p.m., all the press officers and medical officers in CCC were pink, and they were that for quite a while. And so suddenly the boy became the most hit boy in the class, for only he has the color that the heroes wear. And Minister Chen Shizhong, the commander, even said that Pink Panther was his childhood hero. So the boy also wears the color of heroes. And so the pink was trending for quite a few weeks. And so this is a great accountability mechanism, like 24-hour iterations, like for not just gender mainstreaming, but also amplifying social innovation. Next. The fair pillar concerns equity and inclusion of accessing to essential services related to health. Now, around that time, around mid-January, I think, when CECC gets set up, because we had previous exposure to SARS, people already started stockpiling medical grade masks. Now, the problem is that because in Taiwan, we only had at the time less than 2 million medical mask production facility per day. With a country of 23 million, that means that we had to ration out mask. But even before we actually roll out the rationing plan starting February, there's a new social innovation that was rolled out by an individual in Tainan City named Howard Wu. Next slide. And Howard Wu built this map. It's based on Google Map, as you can see here, and it basically allows anyone to crowdsource whether there's still some mask or whether it runs out of mask on this map. And so he turned something like a noise-filled chat room into a signal-filled crowdsource map that enabled everyone to contribute. However, of course, the quality of the data varies because in places where there's less volunteers, you do not get high-resolution data. But it's a really good idea. And within the first couple of days, because it got aired on national TV, Howard owed Google in API usage fees, I think more than $20K US. Of course, this is not sustainable. So he went on the Gov0 or G0V, a civic tech movement. Now, in Taiwan, we do have our GovTech people, with me at the head, but the civic tech people are much more innovative, and they're always discussing this in open source way. And so I participated in their discussion as well, and immediately noticed that this is really a good idea. And so I told to the head of the cabinet, our premier Su Zhenchang, saying we need to trust the citizens with open data in real time. Now, in Taiwan, we have our procurement laws that says all the people-to-people interaction parts through a website also need to be machine-to-machine enabled through an open API. So piggybacking on that principle, we released the real-time ability of mask in each and every pharmacy, updated every 30 seconds. Now, this enabled Howard Wu, Finchen Kiang, and many other people to build this real-time tools that allow people who queue in line to participate in ability. That is to say, when you queue in line, nowadays it's 10 medical masks per 2 weeks. You can see literally the person queuing before you swiping their national health card and then see in real mask availability deplete by 10 in that particular pharmacy. And if people notice that it instead raised by 10 or something, they will call 1922 right there. So imagine if we publish every day. It's basically third-party accountability. You have to trust the national auditor. But because it's updated every 30 seconds, it becomes second-party accountability, participatory accountability, and everyone can earn trustworthiness. It's like a distributed less than 100 different tools, each keeping a record. Next slide, like this. So that when MP, a member of parliament, Gao Hong'an, previously VP of data analytics at Foxconn Group, so she knows something about data, interpolated Minister Chen Shizhong saying, it looks fair, right, in the map. But if you delve deep into the time cost, actually for people who are less equipped, like with cars and so on, they have to travel through public transportation. And in the more rural places, even though the physical distance on air is the same, it's actually uneven, so that by the time they get to the pharmacy, it may have already been closed. So it's actually unfair. Now, because this is evidence-based interpolation, Minister Chen Shizhong didn't defend the policy at all. He simply said, legislator teach us, and that's what he said. And the very next day, we started working with the OpenStreetMap community, next slide, and co-created a convenience store pre-order mechanism so that you can pre-order online and pick up nearby convenience stores and so on. And so MP Gao was very happy, saying yesterday's interpolation become tomorrow's co-creation. So I would argue that this not only bridges the digital divide by introducing convenience store staff in addition to pharmacists to help the elderly people and the people who are less equipped with mobile phones, but actually engage in policy making through this multi-stakeholder consultation based on the same data. Next. Now, I don't have a lot of time to go into the counter infodemic part, but the fast, fair, fun, the fun pillar is, I think, a highlight of the Taiwan model, because this is what we call humor over rumor. We found that the people's conspiracy theories, for example, there was a time also in April where people would buy tissue papers because there was a conspiracy theory that said all the material that's going to go into the mask factories are the same material as tissue paper, so we'll run out of tissue paper really soon. Now, of course, this has no basis in reality, but it did motivate people's behavior, so people do panic buy. But within a weekend, within literally 48 hours, the R value, the basic transmission rate of the conspiracy theory decimated very quickly until it's below 1. That is to say, it's cleared up. And why is that? Next slide. Because we rolled out a vaccine of the mind. Now, this is Premier Su Zhenchang. You saw his front side, now this is back side. And it says in very large print that each of us only have one pair of bottoms. This is a wordplay, because in Mandarin, to stockpile tuan sounds the same as tuan. And so because of that, people, this went viral, like literally went viral. And there's a table that says here that the tissue paper material came from South America, while the PPE material came from the domestic material. There's no way that these two could be confused with one another, because this literally went viral. People who laughed about it cannot unsee this, and therefore people learned to clarify those the conspiracy theories without us having to issue any administrative takedowns. Next slide. And so this is not just a one-shot thing. flying. We actually have a very cute spoke dog. The name is Song Shiba Inu. Because in each ministry, we have a team of participation officers that engages the citizenry, engaging the emerging hashtags. Now, the participation officer of Ministry of Health and Welfare happened to live with this dog. So all they have to do after each CECC press conference is to return home, take new photos of the dog, and on the top left, you can see physical distancing. When you're indoor, keep 3 Shiba Inus away, outdoor 2 Shiba Inus away. On the upper right, remember to cover your mouth and nose when sneezing. Don't do what this dog does. On the bottom left, remember to pre-order your mask. But what does the mask do to you? Well, on the bottom right, the dog says, if you wear a mask, it protects you against your own hand, against your own unwashed hand. And this is an appeal to rational self-interest that absolutely goes viral. I mean, when I say wear a mask to protect you against your own hand, you may remember, but you will probably not share it. But when this is a very cute dog post this, then people share it in all sorts of different languages and reaches a lot of people, so that we reach, I think by April, more than 3/4 of people actually wearing masks and washing their hands much more vigorously, at which point the R value become below 1. Next slide. So with 15 minutes, this is an abbreviated version of my TED Talk, an hour long, but you can find the rest of it in Taiwan Can Help That Us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. I think some of the buzzwords will really stick in my mind, collective intelligence, accountability, applying social innovation, trust citizens with open data and crowdsource, co-creation, and I love the last one, humor over rumor. I think we have to smile a lot more and learn from you. Thank you very much for the very engaging session. Well, our next speaker is Mr. Liu Fengyuan. He is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Basis AI, an artificial intelligence startup that builds scalable, responsible AI systems for enterprises. He formerly led data science initiatives for Smart Nation, and Feng Yuan received a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy, Politics and Economics from the University of Oxford as a President Scholar, and obtained a Master of Science in Economics at the London School of Economics. So Feng Yuan, we now love to hear from you, and perhaps slightly different orientation of topics on data and software interacting with the physical world. How do you enhance livability? And how do you see digital technology and the internet influencing governance and community? Over to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Cheong, and thanks to Audrey for such a invigorating presentation. I don't have slides today, but I just want to make a couple of remarks and provocations to hopefully set up what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation. And I'm going to make remarks in kind of 2 segments. First, I was very inspired by the group that we have here, and Dr. Cheong used to be, work at URA and HDB, and it's about physical spaces, and it set me thinking about the interaction between data and physical design of cities. The second piece of thoughts that I wanted to share was around digital technology and governance. What does it mean to be a smart nation, and what are the implications for new technology on national identity? So I'll make a couple of provocations, and hopefully that sets us up for a good discussion. One thing that's really interesting is I used to spend some time working in the Land Transport Authority and looking at transportation. And that was the time when obviously data and the use of data analytics was also kind of emerging. And it's very interesting because you have software which is infinitely malleable, and then you had a physical world where you're much more constrained by the laws of physics. And one of the things that came to me was this idea that what does the use of data in our planning mean for the physical space? And I think it forces us to think about how we can think of cities in a much more malleable way, how we need to design, for our physical spaces to be much more like evolutionary organisms that can adjust with data. Because with data, with the ability to have real-time information, you want the ability to adjust. And maybe in the past, you never needed to adjust physical infrastructure, but now it can be. And let me give you some ideas. So back in 2011 and 2012, there was a big crunch in public transportation. And the biggest problem with public transportation is that the supply takes a very long time to build. It takes more than 10 years to build a new train line, 5 years to buy a new train. But demand for people and the economy changes so quickly in months or years. And this is almost an impossible problem because you're always trying to match demand and supply, and there will always be periods when it's not going to match. With better data, we could actually forecast, right, what the demand is going to be in crowding on new train lines and new bus lines. But what can we do about it? Wouldn't it be great if we could move some trains from the northeast line to the north-south line? Unfortunately, we couldn't because they're built using different systems, right? Why do we need fixed bus routes? Why can't bus routes be on demand? And we tried an initiative to try and use shuttle buses, using data to plan routes, using crowdsourcing to make these bus routes less fixed and more malleable. Right, so you can think about the concept of a grab share extended to public transport. But I encourage, I think, everybody to think about how, with the use of data, the ability to be more responsive, how we can think about making other parts of our physical infrastructure more flexible. And then we can get really futuristic, and we can imagine a world where, with autonomous vehicles, then you really don't need fixed bus routes at all. I mean, the whole premise behind fixed bus routes is that I know bus number 2 goes to these stops all the time. But when I no longer have human drivers who need to memorize the bus routes, when I can assure the citizen that you'll get from your origin to your destination in less than 10 minutes, don't really worry about the route it's going to take, then you can assuage concerns over predictability just with better use of data and automation. Why do roads even have to be fixed? I was reminded by one discussant that Nickel Highway used to have 2 middle lanes that would change direction during peak hour. But it's important to have fixed roads because human drivers need to remember how to navigate. But in the world of autonomous vehicles, we can completely reconfigure not just lanes, but the road configurations, because the roads will just be part of the navigation and the mapping software built into autonomous vehicles. So again, I think what's really interesting to me is thinking about how, with better instrumentation, better data, you really need to redesign physical infrastructure to be much more malleable, and I think that will help overcome a lot of the challenges with physical design of cities. So that's one set of provocations to think about. And I think the other set of topics I wanted to talk about was how digital technology affects governance and to some extent national identity. And when I think about governance, I think about 2 key roles of government. One is really the provision of public services, and 2 is about how you can build institutions of trust, because it's all about consensus, alignment, and that's what participatory democracy is about. And so let's go on to the first area of public services and the more mundane aspects, right? And one of the things I realized, people always used to ask me, what is a smart nation, right? What's a smart city? And I realized it's all about convenience. It's all about, making things a lot easier so you can spend time on things that matter most. And I think increasingly, because, online services have such great user experience, public services only have to catch up. Whether it's managing your CPF, the comparisons are to digital banks, whether it's, buying a resale HDB flat, the comparison is again to kind of online platforms like Property Guru and other services to buy and sell flats. So it's all the mundane things, paying for parking, registering for my son and daughter's birth certs. But I found that in the last 5 years in Singapore, these bureaucratic rabbit holes have really gone away a lot more for me. And that makes me very happy, right? It's all these small frictions that have just made my quality of life a lot better. And, Singapore has this brand where things just work, right? We don't even have to file taxes. A lot of the times there's auto tax filing. And I see, digital technology in government as a continuation of that experience. How do we, citizens shouldn't have to think about their interactions with government and all the bureaucracy. And the more we make that a more delightful experience, the more it's allowing people to spend more time with human connections. And so, a smart nation is really just in a more simple way about convenience at one level, right? It's all about the user experience. The second, I suppose, more weighty issue is about how the use of technology, the internet, social media, and the impact that's been having on institutions, trust, and participatory democracy. And I always lament the ability to have the inability to have a serious policy debate on Facebook. I like the fact that I can reach out to all my friends on Facebook and connect. I want to hear their views, and every time I start to have a serious conversation online, it goes nowhere, right? And that's frustrating, but it should be exciting, and it's really futile. But I think a lot of political discourse, a lot of public policy discourse is happening on social media, and how can we make this a lot better? I think obviously there's a lot of conversations around echo chambers, and I think the answer, I don't have the clear answer. I quite like this idea of the intersection of physical and digital communities, right? I feel like it's a lot easier to have connections in person, right? During this COVID pandemic, you have all these Zoom meetings, and I find it so hard to build any connection. It's the same person, they're saying the same thing. I can see their facial expressions. It's hard to build trust. And I think the other observation I've had is I've got all these friends who are really reasonable in person, but really strident on social media. I almost don't recognize them. And maybe it's the algorithms that are only surfacing their really strident posts, or maybe subconsciously they're optimized to be more strident and extremist because it gets them more likes. But I feel like the mode of communication differs online and in person. And the more we can have that intersection of having online communities meet in person, physical communities continue the conversations online, I think that's going to be very key in building conversations that are much more honest and much more effective. One observation somebody made to me is every blog in Pongo, it's a physical community, also has a Facebook group, right, which is a digital community. And I think maybe the answer is in that direction with the intersection of the physical and online world, so that we can have different sorts of communication. I think I've talked. I'm coming to the end of my time, and I've talked about these two areas, and I hope there are enough provocations for some of the discussions and conversations later on. So I'm just going to stop there and hand the time back to Dr. Chiang.
Right. Thank you, Feng Yuan. Actually, a lot of the things that you're talking about strikes a chord with me, and you're right. I think many of the new HDB blocks do have online communities, and they get together to decide how to aggregate demand and buy cheaper things for their homes, for example. So a very active community there. Now, thank you very much to the two speakers for very interesting comments that sets us thinking. And now I'd like to invite our two discussants to react to the two presentations, and they may have even more questions or comments. So we love to hear from them. First up is Professor Ang Peng Hua. He is the professor at the Wee School of Communication and Information at NTU, where he was the former dean and director of the Singapore Internet Research Centre. He's trained as a lawyer, but also has degrees in communication management and mass media. And actually, Prof. Ang has authored the book called Ordering Chaos, Regulating the Internet. So we sort of can imagine where's his orientation and concerns. And apparently he was also appointed by the UN SecGen at that time, Kofi Annan, to be a member of the Working Group on Internet Governance to prepare a report for the 2005 World Summit on the Information Society. And today we absolutely understand why there is a need for some of these things. And currently he chairs the Advertising Standards Authority of Singapore and is one of the vice presidents of the Consumers Association of Singapore. So I'm very happy to invite Prof. Ang to give his comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kun Hin. Yeah. So Minister Tang, I'm really delighted to meet you in online. Would be ideal if you're face to face. I'm really inspired to learn that you feel that Taiwan has managed to improve democracy during this time of pandemic. In fact, the constitutions are written so that they assume that in the times of crisis, democracy will be suspended. All constitutions are designed that way. You suspend some rights during a time of crisis, and you would think that in order just to survive because of the crisis, you do need to suspend democracy. So to hear you say that you strengthen democracy at this time is really inspiring. I mean, it's the issue that democracy is, as I say, it's the worst form of government only because, and we use it only because the other forms are worse, right? So democracy leads to, in the end, a better life, and so to survive, it's it's major. I'm wondering, because you talked about how Taiwan was open, whether the key variable is not openness and it's not freedom of expression, because coming from Singapore, people always say, you're from Singapore, you don't have freedom of expression, and that's why you managed to handle the COVID, right? That's why. That's the only link, right? Nothing else. I'm wondering whether it is because, and you have sort of alluded to that, it is, as the chairman also moderator said, it is because of your social capital, the high level of trust that you have. I mean, it's amazing to hear you say that you reach out to Civic Tech to work on the projects. So your Open Tech and Gov Tech reach out to Civic Tech. It's really quite amazing. I mean, I think we all wish, I think I speak for Feng Yan to say that we wish we have a greater collaboration, right? The public-private sector working together. In Singapore, the government tends to be looked up to do all things. The government can solve any problem, right? Kun Hian is part of it. He gives us good stuff, right? The Garden by the Bay, please come visit us, right? For that, our HDB flats are better by the generation. I mean, you can see that each generation of flat, even 10 years apart, the one that comes newer is really better. I mean, by all indicators, right? So we feel that we are improving, and the government is doing that. But sort of civic organizations, civil society seems to take a back seat, partly because the government is effective. So I think I would like you to sort of elaborate a little bit about that, like how you managed to get this collaboration. It must have taken years. I can't imagine that this happening soon, because Taiwan had a militaristic government for a long time. So something happened, and then you became more open, and there was more collaboration. I think I agree with Conan also that the humor instead of rumor. Okay. Actually, I have a slide somewhere. If you're going to say that, I would say I have a slide somewhere in my deck, that my laptop. Those civil servants in Singapore have a sense of humor, and it's only one answer. It's multiple choice, but it's only one answer there, right? I'll leave to imagine which answer it is, right? So how did you do that? I mean, is it you yourself? I mean, you seem to have a lively sense of humor. Most civil servants take it that if you're serious, you're more likely to get promoted faster. Right? If you are serious, if you make jokes, then you're like, oh, you're lightweight, you're a joker, So how do you manage to incorporate that? We can see that humor makes messages go viral, makes things a little more lively. I think I would like to know the extent to which these tools that you have, your slide says 100 plus tools that were used, to what extent were they successful? You talked about the rationing of masks. If 2 million out of a population, more than 20 million, that's not enough. So did the tools help, and how? Okay, so if you know that the masks are not there, but the masks are out, what do you do? So we can elaborate a little bit, how you did that. And then my final question for you would be the element of data sharing. To what extent was there data sharing? You mentioned chatbots, and I know that chatbots require the algorithm specific to the application, certainly at least at our level of development. And so you need a Taiwanese pronunciation for your Taiwanese language, your Taiwanese algo. Was there sharing of algos across? Because you mentioned chatbots, the plural, so that you shared. I think you basically gave your Civic Tech some of the algorithms for them to use. So for Feng Yan, yes, I completely agree with you. Transport could be better used. AI. My beef is traffic lights. And I think many people were like, yeah, they agree with this person here. We go from red lights to red lights. I mean, this came across like red light, and I'm moving at a reasonable speed, and then you hit that, you're first in line, one traffic light, and then you're first in line, next traffic light, you can stop there. So is there a way to use that better? I mean, like, why are we not using it better? I agree with you also that trust is an element, and I guess it kind of intersects with what the minister has said. To what extent can we build trust, technology or otherwise? My final point, my last minute here, is that you have the use of Facebook for discussion. There's a theory in this space, a hyper-personal theory of communication, and it says that you can do whatever you want online as much as offline. And in fact, online you get some features that are not available face-to-face, but online will take longer. So it is possible, but I don't know, you want to sort of take longer to do that. And also, I think we need a culture. I don't know, you have some views on this. We need a culture of discussion, as what the minister seems to have in Taiwan, of collaboration and deliberation. So to what extent do you think you might have this? And you worked in government, you've been inside the recesses. how might we be able to do it? Perhaps at a small project, then we begin there and then to take it from there. Okay, so my comment there. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much, Prof. Ang. Wow, lots of questions to think about. So while you mull through those, I'm going to ask Dr. Wu Junjie to come in, JJ, to give us his comments, so that in the meantime, you have to think about also questions from Prof. Ang, which has raised quite a lot of issues. Now, Junjie is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies, and he was formerly the assistant professor in the Public Policy and Global Affairs program of NTU and at the Education University of Hong Kong. He was a fellow at the SUTD and at the Harvard Kennedy School. Junjie received a BSc in Economics and Management from the University of London and a Master of Science in International Political Economy from NTU and his PhD in Public Policy from NUS. So I'm sure he has a lot of comments for us to chew through too. So over to you, Junjie.
Thank you, Dr. Cheong. And thank you to the two speakers for your very insightful presentations. Like the audience, I've learned a lot today. Now, I would like to just give a few observations, raise some points for further discussion. And well, first of all, the two presentations have given us a lot of insights into how technology can enable and inform policymaking. I think Taiwan's experience with COVID-19 is a good case in point. And like everyone else in attendance today, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how Taiwan's smart city strategy and technologies have contributed to its successful pandemic response efforts. And perhaps moving forward for other smart city aspirants like Singapore, will smart cities continue to possess an edge in responding to crises and pandemics? And why is this so? Now, the second thing that came to mind was that based on these presentations, it is clear that there are very tangible, real-world implications from the use of technology and online platforms. And the recent debates over privacy issues in contact tracing, changes to WhatsApp user agreements show how the use of data in the delivery of public and commercial services can come with important privacy considerations. And these considerations are not trivial. They are tied to our personal identities and behavioral preferences, not just in cyberspace, but in our daily lives, the products we choose to consume, the lives we choose to lead, the beliefs that we adhere to. And certainly, our second speaker, Feng Yuan, made an important point that social media algorithms can give rise to echo chambers. And certainly, digital platforms and online social relations that they foster can impact real-world social life and policymaking. Like Feng Yuan, I too have lost several friends from attempting to discuss politics on Facebook. I would not recommend it. And aside from social media, online petitions have been used to push issues onto government's policy agenda. Social media platforms can also serve to amplify sectoral and minority interests. There are pros and cons to all this, but at the heart of the issue is, how can governments manage the demands of both online and offline constituents? Does the prevalence of technology as a communicative tool and information source disadvantage those who do not have access to these technologies, or simply do not know how to use them? Like the poor, the elderly, we're talking about the digital divide, of course. And well, taking a technologist perspective, as Feng Yuan is able to do now with your experience in public policy as well, how can technology help to reduce the socio-political rifts that may occur, or at least help policymakers better manage them? Are there other tools? Is it possible to use technology to manage the issues that technology has inadvertently caused as well? So a lot of weighty issues that I hope that we can spend time discussing. And I'll just close off all my comments by pointing out that technology and livability, it's not necessarily the same thing as technology for livability. Technology can be used to improve public service delivery and livability. It can also give rise to new digital divides and inequalities. So technology is not simply a tool, but a broader commingling of our online and offline social realities, warts and all. And maybe we need to explore new approaches to building social capital, establishing broad socio-political consensus, even as we continue to draw on these tools to manage our daily policy issues. And I'll stop here so we have more time for discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think all very, very good questions. Now, I would like the two panelists to perhaps respond to Prof. Ang and JJ first, before we look at some of the questions from Pigeonhole. In fact, some of the issues they raise have some overlaps with questions that are coming in from Pigeonhole. So first up would be Prof. Ang's questions, and perhaps Audrey and subsequently Feng Yuan, please feel free to touch on them. Let me just quickly reiterate a couple of things he said. I think he made the distinction between freedom of expression and social capital. Having strong social capital, being able to enable technology to deal with the pandemic rather than necessarily just about freedom of expression. I think Taiwan has a very interesting model because it's pretty much ground up, right? And I think that's an interesting contrast from perhaps the model in Singapore, where government took a very active role in managing the pandemic using technological innovation. So I think that is an interesting question. So then the question is, then what about civil society? What is the right balance? I don't think necessarily that civil society in Singapore obviously should not just take a back seat, but then what's the right balance? I think that would be an interesting issue to think about. And as to whether civil servants have a sense of humor, I think I'll have to have an offline discussion with Prof. Ang on this separately. But maybe Audrey, over to you, perhaps to address this issue. Thank you.
Certainly. So I will first note that our choice of words are different, right? I talk about the social sector, whereas you talk about civil society organizations. I talk about the public affairs being managed by the people, public-private partnerships. But the people will probably not be the first in the traditional PPP arrangement. And this reflects the basic fact that in Taiwan, democracy comes gradually, as we have pointed out rightly. And the social sector organizations, especially around large disasters such as the earthquake around the turn of the century, the typhoons, and so on, they gained a lot more legitimacy than the public sector, because at the time, I think around the turn of century, the first term of directly elected President Lee Teng-hui was still only on the first term, and we have not yet finished democratization. But still, the social sector organizations, the large charities, the co-ops, the social entrepreneurs, and so on, already very swiftly moved in space and in also online space to respond to the needs of the post-earthquake recovery and response. And so that builds a lot more trust. And even to this day, when there's a large earthquake, if the Tzu Chi charity publishes a number from the social sector and the local government publish a number, people still tend to trust the social sector's number. And so that's a very different configuration compared to many other jurisdictions. And that's the first answer. Now, the second about humor, really we got there by exploring all sorts of different models. The NETS DG model, where the economic sector get to censor hate speech. The Singaporean model, actually, where the administration do have a kind of power to essentially force corrections from the media sector and so on. And we've explored all these in our multi-stakeholder conversations. But the upshot is that just like because Taiwan, we remember SARS in 2003. So any counter-pandemic strategy that mentions the lockdown, like the barricading of the Heping hospital, is a non-starter because people remember how bad it was. And so people above 40 years old here remember how bad martial law was, right? So anything that extends the power of the administration when it comes to counter-infodemic is a non-starter, as long as there are still legislators above 40 years old around the time when the nation started to lift off the martial law, is a non-starter. So we explore all sorts of different solutions until we meet this idea that humor over rumor actually works if we respond to the same news cycle that can respond to people's anger in those counter-power fueled anti-social social media spaces, because if people's energy gets vented from outrage to revenge and discrimination, then there's no turning back. But if we cycle, people's energy goes from outrage to worrying about something together, and then to laughter and so on. The same energy cannot be reused for the hate and revenge. It's a one-way street, which is why I call it a vaccine of the mind. So it's not me who personally started it, but I helped amplifying it in 2014 and later on becoming an official response strategy around 2017. And finally, the question about the success of civic tech, specifically the sharing of the algorithm. This is an excellent question. Of course, our production facility did eventually ramp up the production to more than 20 million medical masks a day. And that's not civic tech, that's entirely government engineering. However, the civic tech people can actually help a lot by reflecting on the actual production, because people want more than anything equitable distribution. And so especially for people who are the elderly or immigrant workers and so on, the civic tech people can make sure that starting from 2 medical masks per week to 3 medical masks per week to 9 per 2 weeks to 10 per 2 weeks, it gets rolled out in a space where people can participate in accountability and also translate to serve more than 20 national languages, because in Taiwan we have a National Languages Act. So the 20 languages, more than half are indigenous, also Taiwanese, Hakka, Holok, and so on. All these get equitable treatment. And so we build a national language database, including the corpus for machine translation and things like that, as what we call a digital commons, a digital public infrastructure. So all the chatbot workers can build upon the same material and also share freely their research. We just passed this interpretation that says anything that's open data, meaning it's open source licensed and structurally machine readable, are by definition public benefit when it comes to the use of public money. And that's a very large step, basically frees up all the not just open access, but the open reuse of the scientific research data.
Thank you, Audrey. Prof. Ang and maybe JJ, do you have any response or additional questions on this point to Audrey as a follow-up?
Okay, so just a quick one. It's interesting you mentioned the 40 year as the cutoff, because you are below the 40 years old, right?
Yeah, I'm 39, yes.
Well, okay. Yeah, I did some research there, right? So I guess what you're saying is that there's a big element of history behind it. And so in a way, you're kind of forced to take some creative measures, which, for us, we haven't had a record. So we kind of went with what, we were quite comfortable with. Yeah. No, I'm good. I mean, that's a good historical point to note about the different cultural elements here, definitely. Sure. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there are no, JJ, anything before we move on?
No, not at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought the other set of questions that were posed by the discussants really center around really all smart city strategies, more the physical part of it. And I like the point about tech and livability is not really the same as tech for livability. So the question really is, how do we ensure that the tech that we introduce, it's really for livability? So I think, Feng Yuan, you sort of mentioned that a little bit. So I don't know whether we can just pick up on some of these things. And of course, Prof. Ang has his desire, to improve your traffic lights, for example. So the question is, how do we make sure that the tech that is adopted really is for livability and is really suited for people? I can tell you I face that all the time when I'm developing smart solutions for HDB towns, for example. So let's talk a little bit around that. I'd be happy to hear from the panelists and all the discussants.
Yeah, maybe I'll take it. Maybe I'll take a stab at that. I think it's important to make sure that technology is a tool, and you think a lot about, in a product space, it's called user experience, right? Or the citizen, experience, which is why I just emphasized, everything about Smart Nation. It just translates to me having more time to spend with my kids, right? It's all about the citizen experience, and not to be too enamored by the tech, right? So I worry when people say, I need to put AI into a solution or a chatbot into a solution. I get that a lot, to be honest, even as I talk to people in big corporates, right? And it's easy to be too enamored by the technology. So I think what's great is that you see as technology becomes more pervasive, you see a lot more use of multidisciplinary teams. So it's having the right designers, the right people who can have conversations with users, interviewing users, understanding where the problem is, what the pain point is, rather than immediately saying, hey, I need a data solution for this. So I want to use the traffic light example, right? How do we know there's a problem with traffic light optimization? Now, obviously, each one of us, because we have our own selfish need to get to the destination in time, is always going to feel frustrated. But we need to also consider the other person, who on the other side of the road, right, who's traveling in the perpendicular direction to us. Collectively, is there a lack of optimization of traffic lights? Or is it just that we're only considering our perspective? And obviously, we always feel frustrated. We always feel the lights are against us, right? And so one of the questions I always ask is, how do you know you have a problem, and be very data driven about that before you rush to use AI to solve the traffic light problem? I know for a fact that there are actually quite sophisticated algorithms that LT already uses, to manage traffic lights. Maybe with better, 5G connectivity and communications between autonomous vehicle and the traffic lights in real time, that can be even better. But some of that technology is already there. So I think, thankfully, a lot of technology nowadays is not just engineers trying to solve technical problems. I think it's a much more multidisciplinary effort, which I think is a step in the right direction.
Okay, any other comments from the panelists? I must say that Feng Yuan, in my own experience, when you say user experience, I think the starting point is really getting the right use case, because it's very easy to have tech for the sake of tech, but because you really need to have the right use case, and you need to understand what is the right use case, and we need to understand from people what do they really want, so that we can work on the right use case and then use technology as an enabler. I think that would be a very important first step. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from Audrey, in Taiwan. You see, how do you determine that right use case before you even talk about the user experience, right? So again, in the example of the pandemic, of course, it was, as I say, pretty much ground up. It was very clear what the use case was, and it evolved, right, as it went along. So I'm just wondering whether, Audrey, would you have any comments on how Taiwan wanting to develop as a smart nation and city would actually, we talk a lot about the democratization of the process. How do you know what people want? And how do you then deploy the tech accordingly to get the right use case? Be nice to hear your thoughts.
Yes. Sure, we say more about smart citizens than we talk about smart cities, but I still think it's comparable. So this is a actual case. I hope that you can see the rough shape of the original conversation of the AI called Polis, POL.is, currently at polis.gov.tw is a part of our digital public infrastructure now. Now, this is an AI-powered conversation in 2015. The first case was UberX. Now, I assume we all know what UberX is, so I will just point. In 2015, Uber was working with people who doesn't have professional driver licenses and announcing it's a so-called sharing, and that sparked a large controversy. One side says it's not sharing because they're not evil. The other side says they are sharing because they're time sharing. There's really no way out of this puzzle if we talk about the ideological things. It would just get more antisocial from there. On the other hand, we do use AI, and by this I mean assistive intelligence. It's not authoritarian intelligence. Assistive intelligence, like Polis, satisfy two constraints. One is that it's aligned, meaning that its only interest is just to visualize to people all those about the Uber X, specific case about Uber X. So I see my friends and families, they're in different clusters by K-means clustering, and I can see that they feel differently than I do, but it's fine because there's no right or wrong about feelings. Now, also, they are accountable in the sense that instead of deep learning, it's just K-means clustering and principal component analysis, so that all the data is open data for analysis. The software is AGPL, is free software, and anyone can draw their own conclusions based on the human experience of going to the police conversation and see one statement from your fellow citizens. So back then, this is my statement that says, I believe that passenger liability insurance should be mandatory regardless of whether they are professional drivers. Now, this actually, a lot of people agreed. And once they agree, their avatar moved toward me. If they disagree, their avatar moved farther away from me. But there is no reply button, so there is literally no way for the troll to grow. The troll really can't troll any person here. And because we look for diversity and inclusion of voices instead of the sheer like counting the numbers of people in each group, each agenda must convince all the different groups across the aisle. And so this is something we took from internet governance. Actually, it's called a rough consensus. So you can imagine like hundreds of thousands of people humming together. And we always get this shape once we deploy police for 3 weeks or 4, in which those ideological statements, they are also there, but it's just maybe 5%, and people agree to disagree. But actually, most people agree with most other people on most of the aspects. It's only surfaced when you have a pro-social media instead of a anti-social media. Everybody agrees that insurance, registration, not undercutting existing meters and so on are important, but people also agree that use app-based hailing, search pricing and so on are also important. And so when we have a strong mandate factor like this, including Uber drivers, then we look at Uber and say, why don't you just implement your algorithm the way that our social norm already dictates that you operate? You see, this is not about the government forcing you to do anything. It's that this is a social norm, and if you don't conform to the social norm, you may face social sanctions. And this is actually very effective. And so Uber adjusted its way of working. Now it's a actually legal fleet in Taiwan called Q Taxi. There's also Line Taxi, many other taxi companies with app-based ride-hailing, but they always satisfy the same competitive rules that enables its fair treatment. Now imagine if we did this on Facebook, on the anti-social media, it will probably the picture will be flipped around. So it matters a lot whether it's pro-social or anti-social in the deliberative space.
Thank you. I think this is an interesting point, right? The issue is how do you use social media to really understand what people want and trying to get a better understanding. Now, there is a question posed on Pigeonhole, which seems to be a little bit aligned with this. And also, JJ, your point about echo chambers, right? And the use of algorithms. Perhaps you as a tech experts can say a little bit about this. But let me just read the question on Pigeonhole. It says, what other thoughts does Minister Tang have about vaccine of the mind to deal with the infodemic that has terrible effects on governance and livability that could get worse in the future? I suspect it's really has to do with the type of information that gets out, the type of echo chambers that we are hearing. So please feel free to comment on this, and I invite the other panelists as well before we move on to some of the favorite topics that we know will come out. So
Yeah,
it's on one hand it's good, but how do you make sure you can get the right feedback, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right,
And
I
not
would say
assume.
that the diagram that you have. Yeah, no, your diagram was very interesting. I'm seeing for the first time. I'm wondering what it took to get to that stage. I mean, like, how many people did you have? What resources? Yeah, it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in deliberation, that's what you want to get to. And this typically, you can do this, but on a face-to-face, as Feng Yin was saying, face-to-face meetings, you can have that. And I participated in some of these whole day kind of event. But you seem to have done it online. It's really quite amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This particular picture is, I think, more than 2,000 people with 200K votes, each vote being an upvote or a downvote. But we've seen this working on 1/10 of that scale, or actually 10 times that scale. This is pretty scalable. So this tool, I kind of tool for listening at scale. And this works because it's used for exploration in design thinking terms. This is just discovering our different feelings and then converging, dividing those different divisive statements on one side and rough consensus statements on the other. But all this does is to define the common values out of different positions. This is not delivering solutions. So the first diamond in the double diamond, and this tend to promote more pro-social behavior than if you just jump through the conclusion like a referendum will. Now, to answer the question on pigeonhole, this is why in our K-12 curriculum, which I also serve as a curriculum board member before joining the cabinet, we emphasize no longer literacy or digital literacy or data literacy. It's a last century word. We now say media competence. The difference is that lit assumes like radio and television, most students just watch and listen and try to interpret. However, nowadays everybody is media in Taiwan because we have broadband as a human right. Anywhere in Taiwan, you're guaranteed to have 10 megabits per second for just $16 per month, unlimited data connection at no marginal cost by it. Otherwise, it's my fault, like personally my fault. And so because of that, a lot of young people, like primary schoolers, they are de facto media, maybe have more Instagram followers than I do. And then they need to learn that they are a media. They need to learn the journalistic standards about the balancing of the reporting, the source checking, fact checking, and things like that. And this is referred to as the competence of the media competence part. And similarly, when they measure the air quality together using the air boxes and so on, they participate in the data governance coalition, and so learn about data stewardship and so on. And so all this is about competence instead of just literacy. And this I also refer to as vaccine of the mind.
Maybe I'll jump in here to kind of respond to some of that conversation. So first of all, Polis is fantastic. I saw it when I was in GovTech a couple of years ago. I know there are a couple of civil society groups in Singapore trying to use that tool. It's an open source tool. So those of you who are interested, I think it's a fantastic way of having those conversations. I wanted to talk a bit about echo chambers and to again compare the algorithms of Facebook with what Minister Audrey is talking about, pro-social algorithms. And the truth is all these conversations are going to be intermediated by algorithms to some extent, right? And the problem, I suppose, with social media algorithms is that they're being optimized for certain outcome. And they have very different incentive structures. They're obviously optimizing for engagement, for linking you up with people you already have a natural affinity for, rather than optimizing for giving you something that's challenging, something that you may be initially uncomfortable with. So it's not optimizing for that. You could design other social media platforms using AI that's optimizing for different outcomes. And I think to some extent that's what Polis is an attempt to do. Now, I suppose Polis to some extent, using clustering algorithms, one argument is that it's more neutral, but you are intermediating by visualizing the information in a certain way. So I'll just end up by saying that the moment you use technology, the moment you use algorithms, there's always, it's never completely neutral. I suspect Polis is an attempt in that direction, but I think we always have to be critical and think about, there's always some form of intermediation, right? Whether you're reading a news article on algorithm, and we just, as part of your education, we need to be super aware of that as consumers.
Thank you, Feng Yuan. I think that is a good time for me to take the conversation to shift it a little bit towards a very popular question that has come in so that I get a good coverage in the remaining time that we have, about 15 minutes. And there's a question that scored the most votes. It says, how does one reconcile livability and service with privacy issues? And then it says, is public consent necessary at every step of the journey? And I suppose this is also tied up with some of the comments that JJ brought up, right? And then he talked about Facebook and WhatsApp. I think that is a pretty hot topic. It's in the news today as well. And a lot of people are jumping ship to other platforms as a result of the concerns of the tie-ups and the sharing of information. So this, of course, privacy is a very major issue. So I would like to open this to the panelists to give us your thoughts on this. Is it a trade-off? And then what is the right balance,
Well,
Maybe
I
I'll
don't think
start
it's a
first, right?
trade-off, by the way. Yeah, but please start
Go
first.
ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No,
Audrey,
I'm
please.
just observing that it used to be that one need to, for example, when analyzing aggregated data, because data tend to aggregate, it used to be that it requires a lot of pre-investment in the data pipeline to extract a little bit of insight, and that's the analogy with oil. But nowadays we don't say that anymore, because a lot of good algorithms can actually make sense with very little data, and so there's no need to make those over investment on encroaching privacy. And also later developments on, for example, synthetic data also makes sure that service improvement can be done with no access to raw data at all through open algorithms or split learning. And in the front, we're working in the National Center for High-Speed Computation, homomorphic encryption that could actually operate on arbitrary raw data with arbitrary algorithm, but in an encrypted state. And so I think it used to be a trade-off, but that was just before maybe this century.
Feng Yuan?
Yeah. I think this issue around privacy is something that the conversation will still evolve. The whole idea around privacy in you look at the history of privacy, it was about kind of privacy of physical spaces, right? To go back to what we talked about, livability. It's the right to be let alone in your own home. And obviously with the digital space, the concept of intrusion has kind of evolved. And one thing that's interesting is obviously privacy is a right. There's no obligation. Privacy is a right, but at the same time, if you notice how in some contexts people are very willing to give up information about themselves. So there are lots of nuances about when people are comfortable with sharing and when people are not comfortable with sharing. And I think one observation I just have is that I wish people would just be a lot more knowledgeable about how the technology works. So if you have objections to Blue Pass and all that technology, please understand how Bluetooth communication works, right? Understand whether or not you believe that device can actually have a GPS tracker or not, right? Is it even physically possible to have that tracker in that? Do you recognize that Bluetooth communications can register an encounter even across walls or floors, right? So the data is so unspecific that it might not be able to help in convictions in meaningful ways, right? It might give you a very wide set of people that you might want to check for contact tracing, but it's probably not very reliable to pinpoint kind of a smoking gun, right? And then you make your decisions, right? And you may still feel that's still unacceptable, but do that with understanding of how the technology works, right? With WhatsApp, right? Do you understand how the end-to-end encryption works? What data are they collecting? Are they sharing with Facebook or not? And then I feel we can have that discussion in more specifics rather than this big bad concern over privacy. It's more about, hey, what data am I comfortable sharing and in what context? And I think that in a way is to Audrey's point about that's how I think you overcome these trade-offs that might need to that appear to have to take place. But once you get down to the nuances, we're able to manage that much better in my view.
Thank you. And at this point, I think we really might need to hear from Prof. Ang, since you have spent quite a bit of...
Yes, I know. But JJ wants to say something. Please go ahead, JJ.
Oh, JJ, yes. Okay, let JJ go first.
Sure. Just a quick one. I wanted to mention that, certainly the technology and all that, the greater knowledge of this would help. But we also need to understand that the end user of the technology is inherently a frequently contradictory, far from rational human being. People hold contradicting belief systems. You may not trust a contact tracing data, but you would trust Facebook with your entire life's information. And why is that so? So maybe we need to go back to fundamentals about how do we build trust, whether it's governments, whether it's civic groups, social groups. So that's one thing. And I just wanted to point out to Minister that you talked about the infodemic, which is really fascinating to me. And I'm sure there must be an epidemiology of the infodemic, where if we think about COVID-19, we're thinking about reverse engineering all these networks, contact tracing, finding out where people got infected. But if we want to nudge people into positive behavior, we are not reverse engineering. We're building up networks where nudges can be pushed, where the right things can be made to go viral. So maybe just to point out that maybe the there's value in looking at this from different perspectives. And Prof. Ang.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Minister, I'm really intrigued to hear you say that it's not a trade-off, because in our mind, there's some element of trade-off. Trade-off is not the best word. It's probably, the way I position it is an ethical dilemma. So an ethical dilemma is I define as right versus right. So in the recent case, it was that of the right to use data to investigate a crime, a serious crime, versus the right to protect privacy. So it's right versus right, and then the answer lies in using ethical theories to resolve that. So if you take the Taiwan case, I thought there was quite serious invasion of privacy in a quarantine method. I mean, that is the report that I read. They actually contact the person every few hours, right? You track, make sure that the person was in the room, doesn't leave the room. So that's pretty serious, breach of privacy. But we all kind of accept that for the larger good of health, right? So I'm intrigued to hear you say that no, there's no trade-off. Perhaps you mean in a larger abstract kind of context. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'll have to
please.
fact check a little bit. We don't know which room you are in. Right? Our contact tracing method, or the so-called real name contacting system, has two prongs. One is for quarantine and isolation. If people have their own residence, they can choose to quarantine at a residence. But we reuse existing touch points. That is to say, through cell phone tower signals, the telecoms already know where the phone is anyway, through triangulation. The resolution is about 50 meters. So not which room, maybe like which block. The telecoms send a SMS, that's true, if person breaks out of that quarantine fence. That is the fence part. Now I want to talk about the participatory surveillance part. Like real quick, like 1 minute. There was a case also in April where a hostess in a hostess spa gets diagnosed with COVID, and she didn't say anything, she being a hostess, in the first day of contact tracing. Now on the second day, out of, I guess, a sense of duty or something, she said that, yeah, she had patrons that would actually prefer to remain anonymous. Now that's a big problem, and it's sounds like a dilemma for everybody involved. But basically, our CECC, Central Epidemic Command Center, said, okay, we'll just have an administrative guideline. Instead of finding anyone or putting anyone to jail, we challenge nightlife district owners to invent a way that can keep the contact flowing if they frequent the nightlife place without that data being aggregated to the government in any level of the government. Now, within a couple of weeks, they found out this way. It's basically a one-time, it's not a one-time pad, but it's a scratch pad that when anyone frequents the hostess spa, they have to find a either prepaid SIM card or a throwaway, I don't know, proton mail or something, and then they verify the contact works on the spot, but they can leave a pseudonym or something. Now that is shredded after 4 weeks as per the guideline. But if during those 4 weeks there's a local outbreak, they go back and contact these people, and then the digital fence and all that apply. But if nothing happens, they just shred it, and there's no data aggregated. And at any level, the government is decentralized on the level of the business owners. So this is, again, a ledger that's distributed, and it relies a lot on trust, the trustworthiness of the CECC, as well as the trustworthiness of individual nightlife district owners. So I just want to clarify this point.
So let me get understand. Your government approached a bunch of people who are operating nightclubs to ask them to come up with a solution that in Singapore would ordinarily be done by civil servants, by senior civil servants.
That's right.
Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, we're saying we recommend people not to visit those businesses until the end of the way, basically. But there's no fines or punishment or putting people in jail.
Okay, I can't imagine the time. Was there ever a consultation with nightclub operators in Singapore? I cannot imagine there was a time of that. I could be wrong, but I can't imagine that. Different approaches here.
This is a very, very interesting case study, you know. But I suppose the issue, just be the typical civil servant I've been for so many years, it does raise certain questions like, you know, this takes time, right?
Yes, I was going to say that.
Democratizing a process takes time, and in a pandemic where there's urgency to track and trace, can you afford that discussion and persuasion and negotiation? So I'm sorry, that's the civil servant in me speaking, I think, right? Very pragmatic and down to earth issues, you know.
But speaking
so
for you,
there is still some trade-off, right? And you have to make those very difficult decisions. But Prof, Sorry,
Sorry,
can you carry on?
Singaporeans
Yeah,
cannot wait. Yeah.
yeah.
No, Singaporeans
So
cannot wait, right?
my
So
immediate reaction really is that, in good times you can wait and you can talk and you can spend the time, and we should, right? But then in a crisis management, you need to react very quickly with good judgment, and even if sometimes it does create certain unhappiness. But at this point, I don't know whether Prof. Ang, do you want to say something about regulation with regards to privacy issues? Is there something that we should be thinking about, maybe in a limited way? I think this has been debated a lot.
yeah, I think for privacy, it is really an issue that people right now do not quite understand because it's a bit technical, and then different levels of this. So so our Singapore law, for example, protects basically personal data, which means secrets, right? Your who you saw, who were you out with, where you took drugs on, for example. These are not protected under the the PDPA. And if you look at why people are moving away from WhatsApp and so forth, it's quite clear they don't quite fully understand what what is being done, what is changed in the new policy of Facebook and WhatsApp. So there's one element of that. And in the space of this area, the rules are tightening. Certainly in Europe, as Minister. So in Europe, that is a tighter rules. Taiwan has tighter rules. Singapore has opted for a lighter regime, but more certainty. I'm told that the rules in Taiwan are very strict, are very tough, but actually not so certain for business. So we have a different regime from that of Taiwan and actually of Europe. But the move certainly is towards greater consciousness about the need for privacy. Yeah. So there's a whole area to work on, right? There's no clear answer right now in terms of regulation, but people just getting edgy about it. And you can see that when there's a lack of understanding, when people petition against the Trace Together token and the app, right? It has consequences because that makes it harder to trace. So we have to address this issue, and it is not, as the minister seems to be suggesting, right, that it's not always straight through regulation. So that's a tough one, and certainly there are things that we can learn from the Taiwan model.
Yeah. Since Prof. Ang has raised it, Minister, could you just say a few words about what is the thinking in Taiwan with regards to regulation?
Yeah, for the pandemic, this time we did, I guess, a little bit better than we did 2003. We did have an emergency situation. The communication was very chaotic. The municipal was responding in a very different way than the central government in 2003 in SARS 1.0. And so the whole Constitutional Court edict really to the legislature in 2004, right after the 2003, when the memory was still fresh, is simply this: when SARS 2.0 came, let's respond to it without a state of emergency, with the Constitution fully operating. And so that is actually when this time around in COVID-19 or SARS 2.0's case, we never declare a state of emergency. All our action or our thing or whatever need to be pre-cleared by the parliament, or the budget pre-cleared by the parliament, and we are always answerable to the parliament interpellation. There's no crisis state, constitutionally speaking, in the whole of last year. And so because that we're operating under a very different set of rules, we're under normal state democracy when it comes to counter-pandemic, which is why we always have to work with existing data collection points. It's not like we haven't developed Bluetooth contact, could not roll it out without the legislature approval and so on. So we chose instead the earthquake advance warning system, which is a very rough, 50-meter radius and so on. So the heuristic becomes then this time, do not collect data that we were not already collecting before the pandemic. And this, interestingly, explains itself much better because people already understand through earthquake and flood warnings the cybersecurity and privacy perimeters of those data collection methods, which in turn makes that they are much more willing to then work with those norms because they already are comfortable with those norms and so on. And so I think this is, I guess, delightfully utopian sounding, but this is because we really had it pretty bad in 2003 and had a lot of advanced deployment in both the constitutionality of the law involved and also in the technological design.
Thank you. So people are much more socialized this round, I think, without having to enact anything special, right? People are pretty much used to it. Now, we are very close to closing, but I've been asked to see whether we can extend it slightly because it's been such an interesting discussion. So there's been a request to just extend it slightly. And I thought, let's cover the one more broad topic. And really, it's about inequality, right? Because we know that a particular digital technology has brought into focus and exacerbated inequality. And in fact, this morning, I was tuning into another session about identity and cohesion. And Professor Joel Kotkin was sharing about the experience, and I think in many cities as well, about who actually gets far more impacted by the pandemic. People who know technology, have the devices, have knowledge of how to get into use teleconferencing facilities, can just quite comfortably work from home. But the people which are out front, particularly the frontline people, they have to meet people, they have to be in front, they have to be out working. And in a sense, it does exacerbate that inequality because quite a few, therefore, were infected compared to people who were working from home. And that was what happened in the US and possibly in many other cities too. So in a broader scale of technology, even beyond the pandemic, this is an issue, isn't it? And in Singapore, we are just as concerned, and I think we have tried to put in place certain things to level up people to technology. And of course, an interesting issue is education. In fact, there is a question that was asked, about, how does technology change education? And really it's about educating people about technology and use of devices, etc. So I would like to bring up this issue about how do we deal with the digital divide? How do we level up people? How do we reduce this inequality? So I'd just like to open this up to a conversation. Feng Yuan, do you have any thoughts on this? Particularly when you were doing a lot of smart nation things, and students, right? You're expecting every student to have a laptop, for example.
I was quite struck by Mr. Audrey's kind of commitment to broadband access, right, that they have in Taiwan. And I know in Singapore we have similar commitments. There are subsidies for access to laptops, for schoolwork. But that's just the device, right? And it's more like connectivity and access to media. So I think there are efforts that are going on in Singapore, as I recall. But I think there are two angles to this, right? Whenever there's obviously a crisis and emergency, those who are more disadvantaged are hit more disproportionately. But I think your second question as well is about education and technology and media, and I worry that I think it's not really a technology issue. It's a matter of how do we encourage more of these conversations, participatory democracy, people challenging different ideas. And I think, ironically, in some other democracies around the world, there's a certain kind of rejection of a certain point of view, kind of diminishing of kind of freedom of expression, right? Just because of cancel culture. So how do we kind of continue to encourage freedom of expression in a way that encourages the kind of engagement that you get from platforms like Polis? And I think that's where you get education, and that's where the education is more important. So it's less about some of it is how the technology works. I talked about understanding how WhatsApp works and Bluetooth works, but the other set of education is around media and how do you have better engagement on digital platforms for the purposes of better participatory democracy. I think there are two different types of education that need to take place.
Thank you for those comments, Feng Yuan. Minister, would you have any response to some of these issues?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I think when we talk about science and technology, we tend to think about natural science and applied like industrial technology. But social science is also science, and social technology, in particular democracy, is also a technology. I think about democracy in terms of information theory, like voting for legislature is maybe 5 bits per person every 4 years. And this is just insufficient bandwidth for the collective intelligence to work. And so I'm digital minister.tw. I'm also / radical exchange board member, and I work with Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum to invent new quadratic voting, quadratic funding, and so on infrastructure on the Ethereum. How do I call it? Co-governing entity. And then this entity, once they try something out like quadratic voting that really works, then we apply it to the Taiwanese, for example, presidential hackathon using the same quadratic voting system invented by the Ethereum folks. And so this, I think, is really a symbiotic approach, because the Ethereum folks are kind of by nature a republic of citizens willing to participate in the on-chain governance. And then our transcultural republic of citizens, which is my translation of our official name of the state, the transcultural republic citizens are then applying it in a way that encourages plurality rather than any singular like industrial linear version of the technologies. And so in our education, we emphasize plurality instead of singularity, and my job description literally says, when we see the Internet of Things, let's make it the Internet of Beings. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see virtual reality, let's make it shared reality. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear the singularities here, let's make sure the plurality is here.
Thank you very much. And I also recall you mentioned some comments about helping to develop data competence, learning about data stewardship. It's a lot about educating the general public, isn't it? And even in Singapore, we have appointed digital ambassadors to just try to teach some of the elderly people how to use simple devices, and step into the world of technology, right? I think, for example, the use of the smartphone has really opened up a whole new world to many of the elderly, and it's quite incredible. Now, how about Prof. Ang? Would you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I
How do
guess,
we deal with the digital divide?
Well, I guess the minister has defined one element of digital divide, which is the participation in a democracy. And I guess that, in a way, the tools do help to bridge that. But I guess there's a question as to what extent that can be done, because you do need some savviness. I mean, you use all those terms, including singularity. I'm not sure that everybody would understand that. I think in Singapore, we're certainly more concerned about the income divide, the wealth divide. And we have a big gap here. I mean, we know that. And the gaps, even as you said, for sort of 40 and below, I find that 40 and above, there is a gap even in on the media side. For example, the use of social media for marketing. And somehow it's assumed, at least in the past, it's a lot better now, but in the past, like those below 30 know how to use social media for marketing. Those above 30 don't know. But then who are the managers? Those have to be above 30. So there's some interesting dynamic there. I would say it is a real challenge that we have to face, because as we push towards using technology, and as JJ has mentioned rightly, technology for livability, we really need to address how do we handle those who are left behind. Some of it is sort of not their own volition. Just the industry just never sort of evolved to catch up, and now suddenly the industry has changed, overtaken by events, by technology, and now they're left behind. How do we manage? How do we sort of bring them up? It's not leveling up, because I know that I'm involved with a small AI startup, and we have somebody who's in mid-career change and took a huge pay cut to join. He's prepared for that, but not everybody can afford that huge pay cut, to join. So I think I don't have a real answer here, but there's an issue that we need to address. Yeah.
Thank you. And JJ, I'd let you have some words on this as well.
Sure. I don't have any solutions either. This is indeed what we call a wicked problem. And with the digital divide, the one that concerns me the most is that divide between elderly population who are not able to use technology or don't know how to do it, and the rest of society who have somehow gotten a bit more comfortable with it. And like any of us who have tried to teach our grandparents how to use a smartphone, it takes effort and time. Eventually, they do get it. It takes time, and it's a boots on the ground kind of problem, right? It's like Pioneer Generation package. It's like the budgets. You just need people out talking to them over and over again with the patience to answer the same question over and over again, which is not quite feasible now in pandemic situations. But I guess in ordinary times, we can think about this boots on the ground kind of solution, and it takes a lot of time.
Thank you very much. I must say that in my own experience of introducing technology to mass public, it's actually not easy, because sometimes the people who design the technology wear certain lenses and make a lot of assumptions, right? But when you roll it out, it's not what you expect it to be. And there's this whole new world of behavioral science. What you think is people will react in a certain way, they actually don't. My own experience is that you need to actually try it out. And so when you try it out, you get a lot of feedback. And my mantra always is to make the technology disappear. It should be so natural for people to use the technology. You should make the technology disappear. So even as we try to bring in digital technology and create smart towns, right? How do we get people to maximize and optimize the usage that we're going to give them? I think a lot of this is about, as you say, JJ, you really is boots on the ground, right? Holding people by the hand and really demonstrating, getting their feedback and redesign if necessary. So it's a lot of hard work, right? But then that is, if we can do that, then truly, right? Technology is for livability. I really like that phrase that Prof. Han was asking. Technology then can be for livability. Well, I think we should end now. And thank you so much for allowing me to extend the time slightly, because it was such an interesting conversation. I think for all those who have tuned in, you please applaud wherever you are, and thank our panelists and discussants for a very interesting conversation. And we hope that from here, perhaps we could learn something. And I must say, Minister Audrey, it's such an interesting presentation you have given, and given us insights into a very different way of doing things. We should come and find out more when we can visit. And thank you so much for giving us your time.
Let's visit each other soon as possible.
Thank you.
And live long and prosper.
Yes. Thank you very much. And so for all the panelists, thank you again for your great participation and comments, and giving us the insights into these issues. So, and I would like to thank all those who have tuned in. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for posting all your questions on Pigeonhole as well. Now I'm going to hand this time back to Carol. I think there will be another session called Soul of the Nation at 8 o'clock tonight. So thank you. Back to you, Carol.
Thank you, Dr. Cheong, for the very excellent moderation. And to all the panelists, as a member of the IPS team, thank you for your very rich provocations. To all conference participants, appreciate you staying with us. Please feel free to continue submitting your questions and comments on for this Technology and Livability Forum. Now, this is because we'll be taking your comments and inputs all the way to our final conference day on the 25th of January, and to the IPS Reimagining Singapore 2030 project. Now, just to let you know that this session was recorded, and you can view the recording on this site. Now, our next forum will happen at 8 p.m. this evening. The topic is on Soul of the Nation. So we look forward to having you then. Have a very good evening, and thank you once again. Bye.